All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's September 15th, 2021. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your teams and showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So if you want to participate, just unmute yourself at any time and we'll be happy to answer your questions. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/officehours. Our call today is recorded. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy our content and want to support it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. It helps us a great deal. So with that said, let's go ahead and kick this off. A bunch of announcements I dug up through all my various sources that I thought were interesting. First and foremost, we did officially merge yesterday our client VPN module. I believe it's the most robust one I've seen out there so far in terms of the feature set of what it supports, and it piggybacks on our whole module ecosystem for our module. So if you've been interested in kicking the tires on client VPN, now's your time to check it out. This is a basically Amazon's managed offering for OpenVPN. Another announcement that came up that I saw yesterday in my inbox was a new vulnerability on Azure, aptly named OMIGOD, and it's a remote code execution, which would be akin to if the AWS SSM agent had a remote code execution and it was installed on 50% of Amazon Linux servers. That's the gravity of this exploit as it comes across by this write-up here. So it was, a CVE almost 10 out of 10. So basically as bad as they get. And I don't know how long it's been out there, but I at this point, can't Microsoft cut a break? I mean, it just hurts that, I feel like Microsoft has turned a page overall, and they're doing really amazing things as a company, and they've embraced open source. But there's just something wrong where now what has been happening on Microsoft since inception, and the viruses and vulnerabilities and all the attack vectors now is common story on Azure as a platform, the number of serious vulnerabilities they've had. And I think it's unfortunate because it overall weakens the perception of cloud as a secure platform when these kinds of things come out. This group, Wiz Research, they also came out with another vulnerability, or they detected a huge swath of exposed Azure databases as well. That was another post I saw from them. So they're making waves. Anything to add to this? I haven't gone deeper on the exploit itself. All right. The next announcement was, so OWASP, which is the Open Web Application Security Project. They are frequently cited for providing some of the benchmarks for how to protect web apps. Amazon's WAF has the OWASP top 10 as one of the supported rule sets you can enable. I don't know if they have the one that just came out now for 2021, but they did come out with some new rules or some refactored rules, as well as reprioritize what they're seeing in terms of severity of these rules. The next one was Matt Calhoun brought this to my attention. The GitHub CLI, which was totally rewritten from the ground up, and released late last year, I think. It now supports extensions in the 2.0 release. These were implemented much the same way you see Git plugins for Git or plugins for Helm. I think you call it porcelain, this way of being able to write whatever plugin you want, basically in any language, so long as you can just script it in Bash as the interface to it. So they have some examples that they link to as part of this release, like being able to manipulate your user status on your personal GitHub profile. Where I could see this evolving is that, like, as a company, if you have conventions you want developers to follow, you can codify them more as part of your GitHub workflow. If you don't already have a tool for your company. So it's all one of these things. What tool do you want to be the hub or the center of your organization? And I think it's cool that GitHub CLI released this, but I don't know if that's still the right place for doing some of the things that it provides. Any additional thoughts on this plugin interface for the GitHub CLI?
I could see it being useful for a classroom setting. So
yeah,
if you're teaching someone Git, and you could have some sort of special submit homework thing for your students learning Git.
Or like, dude, this combined with cookie cutter or something, that would be pretty powerful. So you have a really fast way to spin up, generate new repos, generate new features of it in a repo or something. Yeah. All right. The next announcement that I got was, this one, let's see here. Yeah, this one came from Corey.tech, which is a nice DevOps newsletter I follow, Corey.tech. For those of you in Los Angeles, Corey is the guy behind West LA DevOps meetup, which has been probably on hiatus as a result of COVID. So he publishes some nice announcements. So one of the things I got there was CloudWatch has now announced the ability for custom widgets, which seems almost unbelievable that that doesn't exist already. Now we use Datadog and previously Grafana, so these kinds of things were easy to do. But hey, congrats. And related also to AWS announcements, ElastiCache came up with horizontal scaling for Redis. So if you're using it as a cache, you can now scale the capacity of your cache dynamically. And that seems pretty powerful for companies with that problem. Last AWS announcement for CloudFormation. Now I know we're a bunch of Terraformers here. One of the biggest pains if you are using CloudFormation is, hey, it takes 45 minutes for your CloudFormation to run, only for you to find out that there was something wrong and you can't retry it from the failed step. Now you can do that. Now CloudFormation can persist the resources that were already provisioned as part of that run, not automatically roll back, enabling you to at least attempt a retry if a retry would resolve your situation. And last minor announcement, we've all heard the brouhaha that's gone down between Amazon and Elastic with Elasticsearch. Amazon did I don't know if it's technically considered a hostile fork, but it's basically a hostile fork. I mean, they did not come to terms. They did what you are allowed to do in open source, and they came up with their fork. They called it Elasticsearch as well, and then ultimately renamed it to OpenSearch. I don't understand how it could be called OpenSearch. I feel like there was an OpenSearch already. Anyways, it is called OpenSearch now. And now Elasticsearch as a service offering on Amazon has been rebranded now to OpenSearch. I don't know what the implications are for API calls and the like. I assume they're going to maintain backwards compatibility for the foreseeable future.
They said in their release notes basically that they'll support bug fixes and patches for previous versions, but they plan to introduce new functionality that will diverge from the base branch, starting at like 1.1, I think. So they're going to
But
break
literally the API endpoints have Elasticsearch in their names. Those will continue to be there for those versions, but all new versions would be under the new OpenSearch namespace probably.
Right, basically, yeah. So my point was that going forward, we're definitely going to see feature diversion between Elasticsearch and OpenSearch, and I'm sure the API will be broken.
Yeah,
sometime relatively soon.
Yeah, and so it begins.
Yeah. I mean, they did the same thing with Kafka, basically, too. Like, Amazon is not a great corporate citizen of open source, in my opinion, but that's a whole other debate.
Yeah. So I've heard about the fallout with DocumentDB, and Mongo, but I haven't heard about the Kafka one. What's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, that's why they have the managed service that they have is based on like an Amazon fork of it too, because the Kafka guys didn't want them to. They have their own like Confluent, right? Isn't that's
Confluent? Yeah,
they have their own like managed Kafka service that they try to sell, and Amazon basically just took all their intellectual property and went into business competing against them. So they did the same thing. They basically forked the software, turned it into the Amazon managed, whatever it's called, the MSK, Amazon MSK or whatever it is, and then they, they're not, they're not equal anymore either. So
interesting.
And then they did the same thing with the MongoDB guys.
Yeah. Did Kafka relicense like Elastic did and others?
I haven't followed it that closely, but I think that was what their intention was to do.
Yeah. It's interesting for sure. And like you said, I mean, I don't think they've been good open source citizens in how they approach these. It's been very unilateral type of decisions without, it seems like, cooperation. What's interesting though is, this is a office hours in and of itself. Like, what does this mean for the future of open source and overall, like how we've thought about like Mongo is Mongo and MySQL is MySQL, but now it's kind of like we have variants of Mongo, variants of MySQL, variants of Elasticsearch, and that's the new norm. And when we think about like Kubernetes, for example, I would say in a non-hostile way, it differs pretty significantly between Google and Azure and Amazon, but that's not in a derogatory way almost. I feel like it's just been extended to make certain native integrations better. So I don't know what my point is with this other than to say, it's maybe perspective a little bit on like, is it diverging or is it enhancing?
Well, one thing to, I guess, kind of look at it is the contributions Amazon would make back to the core code base and how that would be perceived by whoever sort of owns that core code base. Because if you're Elasticsearch or Mongo or whoever, and Amazon just picks up your code and offers a managed service with it and makes a ton of money, then that kind of, snubs the face of whoever owns that code. But at the same time, Amazon is saying, hey, we are making a ton of money off this. And so we're giving developers, space, time, whatever, to contribute back into the original code base. I mean, maybe that's part of it that we're not seeing. I don't know if that's happening or not, but I'm just wondering if that's kind of like the disgruntlement.
Well, I think part of the disgruntlement is that a lot of companies along these lines are the way that they make a living so that they can provide open source software is that they sell support services and managed, versions of their software. And basically Amazon is then taking them out of business. So they no longer have the livelihood, or, it's far less likely that you're going to use, some smaller person when you can use Amazon for the same thing when you're already using Amazon for 90% of your infrastructure. So it's that, I think that's the core like grind or debate like between the two of them there that, is a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would feel that very personally if a company went out and cloned our entire organization of Terraform modules and said, hey, you know,
yeah, like what, like the analog would be if Amazon came along and said, "Oh, hey, Cloud Posse, we really like all your modules. We're just going to make it part of our marketplace, and you know, we're going to change the name also, and we're also going to like continue to add on to it, but we're not going to give you anything for it. You know, we're not going to give you.
We'll have a little honorable mention maybe for it. You don't mind, right?
And to Matt's point, you know, like the real question is like what's going to happen to those companies that have this open source support contract model, and two things can happen, right? Like if their lifeline gets like dried up, right, and then they have to go out of business, and all those core developers they're gone. What happens to the feature development for that product, right? When those people...
Amazon owns it now, basically, you know.
It's interesting. It's almost like open source has built-in obsolescence in itself. Like, you know, as soon as there's a player big enough that likes what you're doing, they can just take you and snuff you out, and you did it to yourself.
Yeah, although some of the companies have become more savvy, where they specifically have a license that says that it excludes like, you know, using the software to provide like a SaaS, you know, for that offering. So
that's called the Amazon clause.
Yeah, exactly, the Amazon clause.
I think a good example of the people doing that right, and ironically enough, I'm actually in 10 minutes talking to a recruiter at HashiCorp about an offer. I have a little sign that says, please hire me at HashiCorp. We're pretty awesome. My background here. I just did my own interview process with them. But if you look at Hashi, man, you know, they're a late stage startup, and they're still managing to do the freemium open source model where, you know, everything is open source, but you're still having like the Terraform Cloud, Terraform Enterprise, Vault Console, and, you know, all of that can be, you know, managed as a service with an enterprise support type offering, and they're doing pretty well. And like Nginx, you know, got acquired by F5 and is still open source. It's still Nginx, and they have a freemium model to that as well. But there's certainly in like Canonical, the Charmed OpenStack. I mean, there's a lot of these, you know, dedicated fully to open source companies that have found a way to monetize things without compromising the integrity and the awesomeness of open source.
But I think many of them have done it by changing their license. But I don't think OpenStack changed their license. I don't think did Nginx. What is the license for Nginx?
Oh, let me look. I haven't.
I'm curious. Anyways, this is what's interesting. So like for a long time, using anything but the very permissive MIT, Apache 2, BSD licenses was considered almost toxic for a company to take on, and it was therefore strategic to go with this other route. So I guess if enough of these other big open source projects are adopting these other kinds of licenses, that'll be good for all of us smaller players to start adopting the more protective licenses that we would like to have and still maintain open source. I'll say that for Cloud Posse, I mean, that's a big, you know, reason we have to be Apache 2 is just to make it more palatable to a broader subset of companies.
Yeah, it's not clear how many contributions were made to open source Elasticsearch that would not have been if they were closed, if they closed proprietary. Because there's a lot of people like myself who would probably steer away from something that I couldn't use commercially when I would do an open source contribution. So it's a little bit like, well, yeah, okay, you made an open source license and you just want the entire market share and to have full reign over the direction of your product. But, you know, this is also it's like a pure free market. And that's not to say it's good or bad to be a free market, but it's to say like, I can't blame them. I think where this is an evolving field to understand how do you want to license things and how do you convince people to contribute and learn about your license and why it's the way it is.
And just to answer your question that you had earlier, it looks like Nginx open source is BSD 2 clause.
Okay, so it's still BSD. Thanks. Yeah,
I
anything
want-
else? Yeah, good to
I
add
want
to this. Go
point
ahead.
out something really kind of weird about the way they've titled this. Is they call this Amazon OpenSearch service and supports OpenSearch 1.0. Like open source search is some sort of standard that people are aware of when it's completely not. When you look at like this, time I was just researching the OpenSearch like standard is a GitHub repository organization that's oldest stuff is like from July. It's like they made OpenSearch and it's called AWS OpenSearch. And then they're sort of like pitching it like, oh, it's the OpenSearch protocol. Like the stuff you already
Possibly.
use. And it's like, no, not
I see
even
what
at
you're
all.
saying. Yeah, I see what
It's
you're saying.
not-
I think they just mean that like, okay, so now that there is this open source version, and now we also are deploying that version in our premises. So if you want to run whatever version that is, I think that's.
Oh, it's actually more than that. They started a new organization. There's actually like an opensearch.org. Like if you go to it, that has a whole like description of what they're trying to achieve and all of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Which could be taken as, this is great. They're actually like sort of creating an incubator that's focused on this open source software. It is Apache 2. And they're sort of letting that grow independently as like this thing over here. But the way it's written makes it sound like, oh, you can just plug it into this other thing you already have. And there's like nothing you already have that's OpenSearch. It's just a really generic name.
Yeah.
I think their plan is that going forward, you'll be able to run OpenSearch on premises, and it is an open source project and all of that kind of thing. They're basically just like, it's a hard fork of Elasticsearch, and they're going to let you do whatever, use it locally, but they're going to run a managed service for it, forever. So
Yeah. Could be good. I just thought the title is kind of like,
yeah, I saw it as well.
weird. It's like, we just released Amazon database, supports Amazon database API.
I can help clarify some of that if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go for it.
So Amazon Elasticsearch service is, as you said, is the hosted version of Elasticsearch as previously the previous open source version. And then as part of that, OpenSearch, as everybody has mentioned, is that fork. So the managed Amazon Elasticsearch is still the older in air quotes, if you don't mind, the open source version before the fork. So OpenSearch is today off on the side, but will be offered as part of a managed service in the future as part of that OpenSearch service. So it's really just, the way I interpret it is a rebranding of the existing name of the hosting functionality you're used to today, while also acknowledging that the OpenSearch 1.0 is going to be a first-class citizen, if you will, inside the managed service offering.
So when you go into the console, are you going to see a service offering for Elasticsearch
No.
side by side? No. Okay.
It doesn't exist anymore.
doesn't
It just
exist
says,
Okay.
it just, they rename them. They have like a term of like something V2, like ALV2 or something. I forget what it is. If you go and look at it, and it says like all the old ones will be supported, but then the new one will, then starting with 1.0, they're going to host it, and it will be just the OpenSearch versions going forward. But nothing, they're not calling anything Elasticsearch anymore. They're just calling it OpenSearch service.
Okay.
Like kind of like how you have ElastiCache, but it's Redis under the hood or whatever,
Yeah.
that's kind of the thing.
Variant of ElastiCache. I got you. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually. ElastiCache.
So from the product page, like when you go to launch a cluster, you now have the choice to launch the 1.0, and then you still can, as part of the dropdown, you can still bring up the older Elasticsearch versions, if you will.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for chiming in on that one. Let's move over to questions, Q&A. I had a question for everyone, just curious. Is anyone using the Stack Exchange offering, like the private offering for Stack Exchange for Teams at your company, and how's that working out? How are you using it? Or has anyone used it and it failed and just gave up and walked away from it? Hey, Matt. Yeah.
I used it in a previous life.
Yeah.
And it was good. I mean, it's everything that it's basically just like if you had your own Elastic, you had your own Stack Exchange, wrong thing in my head, your own Stack Exchange for your organization with all the same features that you had before about, so, that you have on the public Stack Exchange with searching and tagging and, repudiation and, all of that kind of stuff internally. The biggest challenge that I think any knowledge base has is getting people to contribute and write the answers up and everything else. So as far as a tool goes, I think it's a great tool. I would, if I were doing it, I would definitely pick it, but make sure you have a process to get content loaded in there and kept fresh and
that was
not
my
stale.
ulterior motive. That was my ulterior motive, was like, all right, so then you have it. How did you get people to stop asking or move questions or conversations from Slack or whatever format you're using, Teams, into something like Exchange, the Stack Exchange private offering? So it doesn't sound like anyone has figured that one out. All right.
The only one I saw is that a company that I know that moved to it gamified it and gave away things to get people.
I could see that would work
to populate them. So if you won like in a month, you got like an extra vacation day and stuff like that, like along the
that's
lines.
cool. Yeah.
I used Discourse at a previous place.
Yeah.
And I guess the way to migrate would be to have like a bot, basically like a Slack bot, and you copy threads over.
Yeah, and so we deployed Discourse for like sweetops, and I've been struggling to really prioritize it. We have like ask.sweetops.com, and there's like 3 threads total over there. But yeah, I think the gamification, but then in order for gamification to work, it's got to be like value to whatever your group is. So if it's your company, it's vacation days. If it's a open source community or public community, I don't know what is going to work other than prestige or recognition in some way.
The recognition actually should not be undervalued. I mean, you can give badges to people and make like moderators for topics.
Yeah.
Also, Cloud Posse store swag is another thing to give away. Like people like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a totally good, valid argument to be made. Yeah, I like it. Okay, then moving on. Next question was from Eric Berg. While we were, I think that was pretty interesting. Today we ran office hours ever so slightly different. Before I kicked off the recording, I solicited some questions up front so we could get them onto the agenda here and answer them. I think that worked well, so I'll do that next time. So Eric Berg brought up that he at his company is now looking into finally tackling how they're gonna do continuous delivery of Terraform. He referenced the Tacos presentation that we did end of last year in December. Tacos being Terraform automation collaboration software, where we had companies like Scalar and Spacelift and Terraform Cloud and Zero come on and show and compare their offerings. So there's a lot of offerings now because I think Terraform has reached a new level of maturity and mainstream adoption. So we see commercial offerings coming out. And Eric was curious about kicking the tires on Terraform Cloud, and then maybe some of the others and what to expect. The first few things on Terraform Cloud that I would just bring up to be aware of is if you are approaching it from like the non-business tier and above, I don't think it's even a viable solution. Like I would hard stop, do not do it. because you have to hard code AWS credentials in every workspace. And that's not an answer. This is like, you don't do that. Like, that's just insane to hard code administrative AWS credentials in God knows how many workspaces that you would have deployed under this thing. So I don't know if it's even worth pursuing a POC doing it that way, because you might end up suddenly exiting that POC before you even realized it, and now you're stuck with these workspaces that way. So the alternative then is to use agents, the self-hosted runners for Terraform Cloud, and that's when you have to click the button, which is, you know, talk to sales, and that's never a good thing. So yeah, so there's that. Otherwise, they've released some nice new updates to their dashboard. I've seen from just other screenshots and things like that. Cloud Posse has not been using them because we struggled really to push it through from a contract perspective with our customers. So it was just a lot easier for us to present Spacelift as a fully functional complementary alternative to Terraform Cloud that is more affordably priced. Actually, it's a perfect segue. It's not a segue, it's a perfect pitch for something I wrote up recently as to why we recommend Spacelift, and I'll post that in the channel as well for you. It's why we recommend Spacelift. It's why we recommend it over things like Atlantis. It's why I don't recommend trying to do it yourself with GitHub Actions, GitLab, Jenkins, you know, fill in the generic purpose-built tool here. I will say one thing, I'm a little bit curious about trying to use GitHub composite actions to try and solve this, but still there's a major missing piece by using most of these softwares, and that's what I consider to be one of the most valuable things with something like Terraform Cloud or Spacelift is that it becomes your accounting software for infrastructure as code. So you know what has been deployed, what hasn't been deployed, what is failing, what has drifted, and adding a process for that. For example, you know, Cloud Posse, you know, we use bill.com for accounts payable, and it allows me to relinquish some control so my bookkeeper can pay, you know, a bunch of contractors lots of money, but nobody receives any money until I click approve. So you have to have that in a business setting, but yet we don't really have that always in a infrastructure as code setting. So tools like Spacelift and Terraform Cloud give us that. So so what are the other gotchas out there for anyone using Terraform Cloud today that Eric should be aware of as he sets out on this journey?
So just to throw one thing out there about, I guess is that I got super spooked by some of the cost, you know, war stories I heard is that
yeah.
we're deployed for each of our client environments in a separate AWS account.
Yeah.
You know, they're completely isolated, and we have a couple different layers of state directories that we push.
Yeah.
And every time we add one, you know, like our Bastion access, it's a separate thing, so I can update Bastion access and all those accounts.
Yeah.
But every time I do one of those, every time I get a great idea to automate something that I've been preparing for that, it's like another 10 state directories, you know?
Exactly. So
anyway.
And then they price the product. I mean, the pricing has changed a lot. I don't know what the latest pricing is. And I don't know if I'd be violating, well, if I said any numbers, I'd be violating some confidentiality, I'm sure. But I think it's public knowledge that it's priced based on the number of successful applies per month, which is a kind of arbitrary number that, yeah, I guess it makes sense in some quantitative sense, but who the hell knows how many successful applies you have per month?
It'd be interesting to see my stats on how many are successful and how many aren't.
It's what I don't like about it is, you know, and this is the sad thing about pricing in general. Like, right, by a company coming forth and saying this is how we price it, it affects maybe your architecture and how you architect it with Terraform. But wait, we should be architecting based on what our business requires on Amazon and how we want to think about it. and not how we're gonna skirt the bill with Terraform Cloud. So on Terraform Cloud, you're gonna skirt the bill by having fewer workspaces. So you're applying less workspaces less frequently. Versus in our case, what we do, like, our customers will have 600-700 or more workspaces out there. And one change could conceivably actually trigger a plan on all of those and apply on all of those if we change it global. So that would be like, 800 applies in one day, in 1 hour. So we don't, I find it difficult how they have it priced. I think efficiency would be a better model. Like, maybe, you're paying for how much Terraform you're using and applying based on build minutes, and then everyone's should be optimizing for having more efficient plans and shorter runtime. I don't know how to solve it. I don't think it's an easy thing to solve. Anyways, other considerations using Terraform Cloud or the other offerings out there, gotchas to be aware of for Eric? The other Eric? All right. Let's see, gonna move on to next question here. So the next question was from Eric, and also Eric Berg. How to seamlessly implement maintenance pages on AWS and then activate them ideally automatically. So instead of 503s being, some ugly 503 message being apparent when you're having downtime serving a pretty page. And I think it was Michael Jenkins. We talked about this last time when it came up, but I think one of the nicest solutions we talked about that time was serving a static 503 response from the Amazon load balancer with an iframe to a static site, which is hosted on S3, or it could even be off of Amazon. So if you want to make sure that it's like more reliable, even if Amazon is unavailable at the S3 level, you could do that.
So the request has been, I mentioned earlier that we put together something where we shove a bunch of files and do some cache invalidations in CloudFront. But what we're trying to, what I've been asked to look into now is just setting the ELB to return 503s always, and then our front end would adapt the API, their
routes
to handle the responses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I used to work on Electronic Arts, the game company, we did this a lot. Maintenance pages. It's really, really, really bad idea to use error codes for static pages or maintenance pages, because some devices are not friendly enough to actually show you the page, and they will show you an error instead of your page saying that it was a 503, because a 503 is an error.
Well, it would be our front end code that would be handling the 503s.
But
so
the code that you give
API
to
layer?
The code that you give to the customer back should be always a 200 no matter what, not an error. Some people used to use a 404, for example, as a maintenance page, and they will return a 404 page with a 404 error, and then later change to a 404 error page, but actually the code back was a 200. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. Just don't send the code back. Yeah.
The way that I've achieved this in the past a little bit was using an ALB, where we had routes. So we had a flag. It was all managed by Terraform. We had a flag that just said maintenance, and then you would apply it. And what would happen is it would insert a route as the first priority that basically just says return 503, and then the static site that we had in the in an S3 bucket would read the 503 and then show like a maintenance page. But then the other thing that we paired that with was we had certain certain IP addresses for developers that would bypass that 503,
That's a good
so
point.
that they could actually test it to make sure that when they're actually doing the maintenance, like the app comes back up and all of that kind of stuff before you release it. That's one way. The other way I've seen it done is
Good. That's a really good one.
yeah,
I like that suggestion a lot. Yeah, because you have to validate it without opening it up somehow.
Yeah, which is hard to do. And I shot myself in the foot like 3 times before. I said, hey, why don't I just like not show a 503 to myself and I'll show a 503 to everyone else, and then that worked.
So long as you have external monitoring, so it's not like, hey, it works for me. What are you saying the site's down?
Yeah. That would be bad. And I've also seen some conditional Route 53 like health check things where you can use that to, but that gets a little bit more like a little bit more complicated to manage, and TTLs come into play and a bunch of other things there that you have to be careful with.
Yeah, I would really avoid DNS manipulation for clients. DNS is just notoriously poorly cached. There's one other thing that we've only recently started playing, which is the global accelerator, which is somewhere in between like the DNS hack and actually an Amazon first class service. So this way you have a single IP for that all clients access, but you can very easily point it from one ALB to another ALB if you wanted to.
The other thing I wanted to say, talking about caches, if you use a 404 or a 503, you are not going to cache it. So you have to make sure, like if you have like hundreds of thousands of requests per second, and you put your site on an S3 or behind Nginx or whatever, you're not going to DDoS it yourself, because you are sending back a 503, which no cache or intermediate cache is going to cache for any time. So you're going to DDoS yourself. So that's another reason why not to use error codes, because 200s and valid cache control headers are followed by caching mechanisms, but not error codes. So
one of the things I've done, which I liked, but I actually regretted it when we used it, was so the problem also with the error pages, right? You serve this site down page, and then there are people they navigate to that, they leave it open, but then you come back, but they have no idea you're back, and that you're still showing the down page. So then what I thought was a smart thing was we have an automatic refresh. So every 30 seconds or every minute or something, that page is reloading. Well,
and you DDoS yourself.
Exactly. In real world scenarios, then suddenly you're DDoSing yourself and you have an outage, because if you have 10,000 clients automatically refreshing every 30 seconds, wham, wham, wham. So, lessons learned. All right, anything more to add to this question for maintenance pages and activating them?
Good stuff, guys. Thanks.
Cool. I'm gonna zip over to the chat, see if there was any questions here in the Zoom chat. Does anyone use a span trace viewer as a primary view into a local development environment? I don't know what this is. Anybody can inform me?
So that's like in the observability space, like tracing. You think about like OpenTelemetry or APM tools.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So Cole, Lawrence, do you want to add some more context to your question if you're still on?
Sure. So I'm very interested in ditching logs entirely and having some form of like what I've seen with Honeycomb's ability to look at like large spans of data and drill down into them. I feel like there's something there that could be leveraged for feature development. So as you're developing a feature, you can actually observe what the path of like, oh, the user clicks this button in the UI, that's a span that led to a span created to actually deploy as this service on the deployment, which led to a span to hook into the Twitter integration, and then it stopped there and then failed. And so you could trace the span through these services rather than the current world, which is like Tmux split session around 4 different pod log trailers, which is a very difficult to onboard people to learn about in my experience.
What are the solutions for, like, we talk about obviously microservices being a common solution, especially in Kubernetes, and then you have all the tracing options available there. And shy of actually using Kubernetes as your remote development environment or local, and using all those tools to do that, what are the options for local development, for tracing across the services? Is that another way of thinking about it, or?
I'll mention one other thing that's like a technical thing is local development's what is Tilt, which is an alternative
for
to
you,
another thing called
or
Scaffold.
or like Garden.
So
or
like everything
Scaffold,
is like K8s. So we could, without problem, like add something to a Helm chart for an OTel collector or vector dev or whatever to siphon them somewhere, like all unified, so it's all still one command. But that's what I'm trying to aim at. Yeah.
So I have a little bit of experience there, Cole, and I'd say that by you saying OTel, in my opinion, you're already on the right track. So OTel is short for Open Telemetry. So that's a vendor neutral implementation of things like tracing, metrics, and logs. So what I've seen is, even if like your company or wherever, like once you get it to wherever the final destination is, the cloud or whomever, you're going to have probably a more mainstream, right, a managed service or something. But even locally, the beauty of Open Telemetry is that you can have a local exporter, so that you don't have to funnel that into, kind of, if you're talking about local development. I've seen people use Zipkin and Jaeger standalone. Jaeger is going to be a little more complicated from a it's meant to run in Kubernetes, if you will. So if you're already running Kubernetes, then it may not be a big deal. Otherwise, you can bring the Zipkin product in locally, and so your code still is just talking Open Telemetry, but at the very end, the export happens to be to, in that case, Zipkin. I've brought in the Zipkin. There's a Zipkin Docker image you can bring in, so that it's lightweight enough that you can bring that in and don't even have to worry about storing it as the data into a repository. It has like an in-memory option, so it's transient, and from a local development point of view, probably not that big of a deal. But yeah,
but it would require also having a mesh in place, no? Or
so you would still have to have whatever you're doing for tracing, right? So Zipkin isn't the answer for the actual tracing logic you're putting into your code. So you'd have to have solved that anyways. But if you're looking at, okay, now I want to take this code that's meant to run in Kubernetes or my cloud provider, whomever, but I want to run it locally, you don't have to be tied to that back end service, and you can still get the benefits of the code that you've got that's instrumenting, or the instrumentation code that's alongside your application code. You can still benefit from those traces and spans.
And something like Zipkin's help lighter weight than like the elk stack.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, well, yes, especially if you're considering, literally all three letters of the elk stack. Yes. Okay. So Zipkin has a regular quote unquote full version, and even has a light version Docker container, so that I think ultimately has some of the less of the features as far as the formats it takes in, or even destinations. But the light version is just the in-memory database, and you can get up and running with that really quickly from a exporter point of view. Again, you still have to have your code that is leveraging things like Open Telemetry. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much for the recommendation. It's difficult to sift through all the different tools in this space.
So Luis Messiah is asking for best practices on organizing Terraform configs for different environments, but keeping common variable settings in just one place. Obviously a pitch for what we do at Cloud Posse with our tool Atmos. This is one of the cool things that we do with Atmos, and I'll share just a link. I won't go into the whole details today, but if you go to docs.cloudposse.com and you go into our reference configuration for stacks. We have this format. We use Terraform. We use YAML, and YAML can be read by Terraform very easily. So what we do is we define our all of our configuration in a structure that looks like this. And then we can import our configurations and they just layer on top of each other. They're just deep merging. So we're able to very easily keep our configurations consolidated and dry at the same time. Now, in pure Terraform, how do you do it? I think you don't. That's why tools like TerraGrunt exist and a number of other tools like Atmos as well. Matt Calhoun, anything to add to that one?
No, I think pure Terraform, it's really difficult to do. You have to rely on some sort of third-party way of doing it to get it to work, unfortunately.
So one thing that is interesting, I forget where I saw it, but it was like Terraform provider, HCL maybe.
Oh, yeah.
What I saw was somebody implemented a third-party provider for parsing HCL. So like var files. So you could actually keep all your configurations in a Terraform-esque config file format and then load them at runtime. Because the main problem with Terraform and vars and var files is you can't select which var files you want to run in the Terraform code itself. It has to be the caller of Terraform, the command line that passes the var file. Or if you specify auto or whatever, it'll load them in a lexicographical order and merge them, shallow merge them on top of each other, which is the other really annoying thing. Like if you wanted to do this in pure Terraform, Terraform only supports shallow merges. And with Terraform 0.12 onwards and complex maps, we use maps all over the place. And you don't want shallow merges anymore with Terraform. You want deep merges. So that's why we actually had to write a Terraform provider to do deep merging for Terraform.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Yeah. It's this is the
That's
module.
the module. Yeah.
Yeah. The provider. Yeah, provider utils. This is ours here. All right. Any more questions today? We have another. Well, we're basically out of time. We got another four minutes or so. So any quick questions to close out the day with?
Well, I had a question comparison between Nomad. I was checking Nomad and Argo, but that will take more than 4 minutes for sure.
Yeah. Well, Nomad and you mean Argo CD? Or Argo?
Yeah, Argo CD and Nomad. Well, that's the problem. Is that Nomad goes through application and.
So Nomad scope kind of encompasses a little bit of Argo.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you will need EKS and Argo to be like the competitor of Nomad in a way, but yeah, I'm actually more wondering if people actually use Nomad, to be honest, because I asked all my friends and no one uses.
Well, the biggest user of Nomad out there is Circle CI. They actually schedule all their backend jobs and everything else using Nomad, and there's a whole bunch of case studies on that. If you that I know HashiCorp published, and I've talked to those guys a couple of times, and they're pretty gung-ho about some of the interesting stuff they can do with it.
Yeah, so I haven't met any disgruntled Nomad person yet. I have met a number of people who have tried it or used it in some capacity, and they've always said good things about it. I would say it's a little bit of this birds of a feather flock together. We are in our own echo chamber here, where Terraform is the rule of the land, and it's either EKS or ECS on Amazon for the most part. But that's just our chamber. I think if you get into some other environments where it's like bare metal, more enterprisey, I guess people outside of our sphere of influence that are using it. I don't know. I'm curious. We wanted to do a demo of Nomad. We're supposed to have one, but I think we put it off indefinitely now. Maybe end of the year or something. But I think it'd be cool to see.
Yeah, there's actually like public docs. I'll post it here in office hours on how Circle uses Nomad, which is pretty interesting. So I just need to get in the right channel. There we go. And there.
Thanks, Matt.
Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of the hour. Thanks everyone for your participation today. I didn't mean to click that button. I meant to share my whole screen. There we go. And we will be hosting office hours next week, same place, same time. If you haven't already registered for our weekly office hours, head over to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, cloudposse.com/office hours. Where you can register to get an invite for our next event. We syndicate these episodes to our podcast. If you go to podcast.cloudposse.com, you can catch up on all our past episodes. If you'd like to connect with me, happy to connect on LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/in/Osterman. You'll find me there. Or if you are interested in seeing how Cloud Posse can help you and your company out, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Take care, everyone. See you.